People think respect is earned through goodness, through integrity, through hard work, through being the kind of person others look up to. Be honest and people will trust you. Be competent and people will value you. Be fair and people will follow you. That's the story we tell about respect. It's clean. It's moral. It's the version that makes sense in a world where good behavior gets rewarded. We grow up believing this completely. The good teacher who earns a student's respect through patience and dedication. The leader who commands loyalty through fairness and vision. The colleague who becomes indispensable through excellence and integrity. Respect as the natural result of being genuinely worthy of it. We see it in movies. Read it in books. Hear it from every mentor who ever told us. Do good work. Treat people right. The respect will follow. And so we try. We work hard. We are honest. We are fair. We show up consistently and perform with integrity. And sometimes it works. Sometimes the people around us genuinely respect us for the right reasons. But then we encounter the other kind of respect. The kind that doesn't follow goodness. The kind that follows something darker. Something nobody talks about in the leadership books or the motivational speeches. The kind of respect that gets granted not to the most virtuous person in the room, but to the most psychologically powerful one. The belief that respect is purely merit-based is one of the most comforting myths in modern culture. It makes the world feel fair, logical, navigable. If respect follows merit, then the rules are simple. Be good at what you do, be a good person, and respect will come. Schools reinforce this. Teachers respect the students who work hardest. Students are taught to respect authority figures who demonstrate knowledge and fairness. Corporate culture packages it as earning your seat at the table. Put in the work. Demonstrate value. Build a track record. Respect follows. Self-help culture sells the meritocracy of character. Be trustworthy. Be dependable. Be the person others can count on. Respect is the return on that investment. And social psychology offers its own version, social exchange theory. Relationships are reciprocal. Give respect, receive respect. Demonstrate worth, be treated as worthy. The entire framework is built on the premise that respect is a rational response to observable merit. And there is truth in this. Real respect, deep, lasting, genuine respect, does often follow demonstrated competence and character. But that's not the only kind of respect. And it's not even the most common kind. The most common kind of respect isn't rational at all. It's psychological. It's not given because someone deserves it. It's given because something in us feels compelled to give it. And understanding what triggers that compulsion, what the dark psychology of respect actually looks like, is the thing nobody is teaching you. Because it's uncomfortable. Because it reveals that the respect we give each other is often less about virtue and more about power, fear, scarcity, and the deeply irrational ways human beings assess worth. Here's what they don't tell you. Most of the respect you see being granted in the world isn't earned through merit. It's triggered by psychology. Specifically, 3 psychological forces that have nothing to do with how good or competent a person actually is. The first is scarcity. We respect what's hard to access. The doctor who's difficult to get an appointment with. The executive who doesn't respond to every email. The expert who doesn't make themselves endlessly available. Not because they're necessarily better than more accessible people, but because scarcity signals value. When something is rare, we assume it's precious. When someone is hard to reach, we assume they must be important. We've been conditioned by markets and biology to equate availability with worthlessness and scarcity with worth. The person who's always there, always available, always willing, we take them for granted. The person who's selective, bound to read, hard to access, we respect. The second force is indifference. We respect people who don't seem to need our respect. The person who needs your approval broadcasts it in 1,000 small ways. The over-explanation, the justification, the careful monitoring of how they're being perceived. And we sense it. We feel the need. And we respect them less for having it. But the person who genuinely doesn't care whether you respect them? Who moves through the room without tracking your reactions? Who states things and moves on without waiting to see if you approved? We can't help but respect them. Not because they've earned it through virtue. Because their indifference triggers a psychological response that says, this person doesn't need me. And people respect those who don't need them far more than those who do. The third force is consequence. We respect people whose disapproval has weight. Whose standards mean something. whose opinion of us actually affects us. A person with no standards respects no one because no one fears their judgment. A person with high standards, who makes those standards known, who actually enforces them. People walk carefully around them. Not out of fear exactly, but out of the understanding that this person's respect is not freely given. And things that aren't freely given are valuable. Things that are handed to everyone are worthless. None of these three forces are about virtue. None of them reward being a good person. All of them reward something else entirely. The psychology of perceived worth. She'd done everything right. 15 years in her industry. Impeccable work. A reputation for integrity that was genuinely earned. People liked her. She was warm, capable, always willing to help. And she was respected. Sort of. The kind of respect that meant people spoke well of her behind her back. The kind that meant she was trusted with important work. But not the kind that meant people listened when she spoke. Not the kind that meant her opinion visibly mattered in rooms where decisions were being made. Not the kind she saw granted effortlessly to certain other people. People who weren't necessarily more competent or more ethical, but who carried something she couldn't quite name. A quality that made people want their approval. A presence that made their opinion feel significant. An authority that didn't seem to come from their resume. She watched one of them in a meeting one day. A colleague. Similar background. Similar experience. Objectively, no more qualified than her. But when he spoke, people leaned in. When he disagreed, people reconsidered their positions. When he went quiet, people wondered why. He wasn't louder than her. Wasn't more assertive. He just seemed less concerned with whether the room approved of him. He said what he thought. Clearly. Without softening or qualifying. He pushed back on ideas he disagreed with. Without apology. He set boundaries without lengthy explanations. He was selective about his time, his opinions, his engagement. And the room treated him accordingly. She started paying attention. Watching not just him but others like him. People who commanded the kind of respect she'd spent 15 years trying to earn through merit alone. And slowly she started to understand what she'd been missing. She'd been earning respect the right way. But she hadn't been triggering it the psychological way. A moment came that clarified everything. A senior leader asked for her assessment on a project. In a room full of people. Her old instinct, be thorough, be diplomatic, acknowledge all perspectives, soften her opinion so no one felt criticized. She'd done this 100 times, and 100 times, people had listened politely and then moved on. She did something different. She gave her actual assessment, unvarnished, direct, without the diplomatic softening. This approach won't work. Here's why. Here's what will. 3 sentences. No qualifications. No apologies. And she waited for the discomfort that always came when she was too direct. It didn't come. The room got quiet. The senior leader asked a follow-up question. Not to challenge her. To understand better. Someone else in the room shifted their position based on what she'd said. The conversation reorganized around her assessment. Not because she'd finally said something more brilliant than everything before, but because she'd said it like it was obviously true and moved on. Like she wasn't waiting to see if they approved. Like their approval wasn't what made her assessment valid. In that moment, she understood the dark psychology of respect. It isn't granted to the most virtuous. It isn't even granted to the most competent. It's granted to the person who seems least dependent on receiving it. Understanding the dark psychology of respect doesn't just change how you act. It changes what you understand about every social interaction you've ever had. You start seeing it everywhere. The colleague everyone defers to isn't necessarily the most qualified. They're the one whose standards are visibly high and whose approval isn't easily won. The friend everyone wants to impress isn't necessarily the most virtuous. They're the one who seems genuinely selective about who they invest in. The leader people follow most loyally isn't necessarily the most ethical. They're the one who doesn't seem to need the loyalty. You see the pattern repeating at every level of every hierarchy you've ever been part of. And you realize something uncomfortable. You've been playing the game wrong. Not because you were doing bad things. Because you were doing the right things for the wrong reasons. Helping people to be seen as helpful. Being agreeable to be seen as easy to work with. Being available to be seen as reliable. Performing virtue to earn approval. And all of it, every carefully constructed display of your worthiness, was undermining the very respect you were trying to earn. Because the performance of worthiness signals that you're not sure you have it. And people don't respect those who aren't sure of their own worth. She had to rebuild her relationship with respect from the ground up. Not by becoming less ethical or less competent, but by becoming less dependent on the outcome. By doing the right work because it was right, not because it would be recognized. By having standards because she believed in them, not because they'd impress people. By being selective not as a strategy, but as an honest reflection of her actual capacity and values. By being direct not to seem powerful, but because that was actually what she thought. The shift was internal before it was external. She had to stop needing respect in order to start receiving it naturally. And the identity change that required was significant, because needing respect had been woven into everything. Into how she worked, how she spoke, how she presented herself. Untangling it meant asking uncomfortable questions about everything she did. Am I doing this because I believe in it? Or because I want to be seen as the kind of person who does this? Am I saying this because it's true? Or because it's what will make them think well of me? Am I setting this boundary because it's right for me? Or because I'm hoping they'll admire me for having one? The honest answers were often uncomfortable, but they were clarifying. And slowly, as she started acting from genuine conviction rather than the performance of it, something shifted. Not just in how people treated her, in how she treated herself. The dark psychology of respect is everywhere in modern culture, and almost no one talks about it directly. Instead, we get the sanitized version. Work hard, be good, respect will follow. But look around at who actually commands respect in the rooms that matter. It's rarely the most virtuous person. It's the person with the highest perceived value. The person who's hardest to access. The person whose standards are most visible. The person who seems least concerned with whether you approve of them. And this creates a troubling reality. The most ethical, hardworking, genuinely deserving people often receive the least respect. Not because the world is purely unjust, but because they violate the psychological rules of perceived worth without knowing those rules exist. They are too available, too eager to please, too quick to accommodate. They work hard to be liked and in doing so signal that being liked matters too much to them. And things that are easily given are not respected. Understanding this doesn't mean becoming manipulative. It doesn't mean performing scarcity or engineering indifference as tactics. That approach fails too, because people sense inauthenticity. What it means is something harder and more fundamental. Actually developing the internal qualities that trigger respect naturally. Actually having standards you believe in rather than performing them. Actually becoming selective because you know your time and energy are genuinely limited and precious. Actually becoming less dependent on approval by doing the internal work of building genuine self-worth. Because the dark truth about respect is this: the psychology that triggers it in others is a reflection of what's happening inside you. When you genuinely believe in your own worth, you stop needing others to confirm it. When you stop needing others to confirm it, your behavior naturally shifts. You become more direct, more boundaried, less performative, and people respond. Not because you've learned a psychological trick, but because something real has changed. The dark psychology of respect isn't dark because it's immoral. It's dark because it forces you to look honestly at the gap between who you're performing yourself to be and who you actually are. Between the respect you're trying to earn and the self-worth you haven't yet built. Between the external validation you're chasing and the internal certainty you're avoiding. Real respect, the kind that changes rooms, shifts dynamics, makes people genuinely defer to your judgment, doesn't come from merit alone. It comes from a person who has done the uncomfortable work of no longer needing it. Who has built something solid enough inside themselves that they don't require external confirmation to know its value. And in a world full of people performing worthiness, desperately trying to earn approval from rooms that can feel the desperation, the person who has genuinely stopped needing it stands out like something rare. Because they are. And rare things, as the dark psychology of respect has always known, are the only things we truly value.